Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and begin. It looks like many of our participants are in and a couple more still trickling in. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all here. We have been really excited about this session this afternoon, and it's wonderful that we have such a big group of us. Thank you for coming. Our session today is called Telling the Stories That Must Be Told. We are inquiring into our local Black history with several community members who are associated with the African American Cultural and Historical Museum of Washtenaw County, and with Dr. Kimberly Ransom, our own SOE community member. And we're excited about this presentation. We think that it partners really wonderfully with the work that's been happening this week during the Black Lives Matter Week of Action. As you know, on Tuesday, we had a session that was about our global community and Black Lives Matter across the world. And we were very thrilled, some of us, to be able to be present for that session, learning about activism in South Africa, as well as activism here on our campus. And today we are looking more closely at our own community, Ann Arbor. And we know and believe deeply that having that wide of a gaze, looking broadly at the whole world, as well as within our own community and to Black communities, and the importance of Black lives across the world is so critical. So it's very important to us that we're here to be able to do this work with wonderful community members. A quick a set of requests for you. We want to invite you to go into the participants box. If you know how to do that, you go to your name in the participants box and you share your pronouns after your name. We want to ask if you can hear us well, if we're speaking loudly enough, and we do have the captioning going, so hopefully that you can see that and that's functional for all of you. We want to make sure if there's anything you need from us to make this space more comfortable, that you let us know via chat. You can take yourself off mute. And we hope that this session will be very informative and invigorating for all of us. But also we want to acknowledge that work on thinking about racism, our identities can require important self-care. So please feel free to take breaks, go, take care of yourself, get water. If you have any questions or you need anything, I have my email inbox open. You can also chat privately with me on the chat box and with Stephanie Hensel, my colleague, who is co-moderating with me today. So both of our emails are there, and you can also write to us in the chat box. Perhaps the one of us who's not talking might be more attentive at that particular moment. So it would probably be better to write to Stephanie if I'm talking, and to me if Stephanie's talking. Another kind of introductory set of comments we want to say that all of our work this week during the Black Lives Matter Week of Action, we are really wanting to make sure people think about all the ways we need to be thinking about being good ancestors. That we've named some hopes here for our talk and for our community, that we will embrace discomfort and grow with grace, that we will establish and nurture an inclusive space, that will share the air, that will step in and step out, that will be open to name what works and what doesn't work, and that we will not freeze work or people in time, that we know that we are all growing. We want to give folks their flowers. We want to notice that people are having triumphs and successes in many different ways, and we want to express appreciation when we see that, whether we're doing it privately, in the chat, in small groups, after the session. Please take time to give folks their flowers. And we have a variation on Vegas rules, that what's shared here should stay here, but what's learned here, we hope will leave here. We hope that a lot will leave here and will really spread across our community, our families, our friends, that you will share what you learn. And we hope that this will be a space of both joy and joyful work. We want to also acknowledge that the U of M is built on the land of the Three Fires people, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. And we want to invite you to reflect on how we honor them in this work that we're choosing to engage in together right now, that this is a truth that we should all be being attentive to. And we want to invite you to study what this means, that we are built on the lands of these peoples. So there's a lot of work we can each do individually to inquire into that. We have designed this week of Black Lives Matter Week of Action with several guiding principles. And we want to name the three that are anchoring our work today. The first is we are committed to intergenerational work. And we hope you will see that today, that we are people working across ages and generations, and that is an important tenet of the Black Lives Matter movement, that there is wisdom across generations. And we are also holding up the notion of Black families and Black villages in our presentation today, that we hope our space is family friendly. We want to invite you to please bring your family in with you today. My daughter is here and is going to join me in a moment, and I think my parents may be here, and please open your space up to your family members as well. We really want to honor and value that Black families and Black villages have been present, working together, living intergenerationally in Ann Arbor, and those are the stories and that we want to learn from today. So those are the principles that we're highlighting and invite you to embrace as well. The other set of resources that we've really drawn heavily from is right here. As you know, we asked you to look at a set of artifacts from the Living Oral History digital collection that is housed in the Ann Arbor Public Library's website. And that was developed in collaboration with the African American Cultural and Historical Museum of Washtenaw County. And if you haven't had a chance to look at our asynchronous module, I know that Laura's putting the links in the chat, and they are really, truly incredible, the whole archive. And we have two youth, Ella Casnavas Upton and Ella Kazembe, who both worked together on that asynchronous module and put that together for us, drawing from the work of the museum and the library to give you a set of artifacts to dig into. And we hope you've done that. And if you haven't, it's going to still be there. So please go ahead and do that when you can. The archive is quite incredible, and we and my family have been learning so much as we've been digging deep into what's there. We hope you've had the chance to do that also. And I'm going to hand off now to Stephanie.
Thank you, Davy. I'm Stephanie Hensel, staff member at the School of Education, and I have the honor today of introducing our guest speakers. Someone who is very important to this relationship but wasn't available today is Deborah Meadows, and our team member Nia Nickerson did an interview with her and talked with her about the origins of the museum, her experience with the artifacts, and some ways to connect with the museum. And that interview is available in the asynchronous slides, and that link is in the chat from Laura just a minute ago. So today, live, we have Dr. Kimberly Ransom. We're glad to welcome her. She's a School of Education postdoctoral research fellow with CREATE, and she has expertise in historiography and Black schools. So she's going to help guide us in our conversation today. And we're also very happy to welcome members from the Ann Arbor area community. We're going to send out the bios in the chat box if that hasn't been done already. I think we're on it. And we are happy to have Pat Ashford Manley, Marlis Dean, and Dr. Sandra J. Harris with us today to share their stories with you. And just to prepare a little bit for the oral histories and the active listening that's going to happen, Dr. Ransom will now help us prepare for those, our oral history storytellers.
Good afternoon, everybody. So good to see so many wonderful people here. So before you go into your breakout rooms, I just wanted to share some things that you should consider as you listen to the oral histories. One thing to first consider is the purpose, or one of the purposes of oral history, which is to humanize the past. And so an oral history, different from what you might experience in an archival document, is that you will get a very nuanced, perhaps detailed telling of a particular place, a particular time, a particular experience, and also a very humanized telling. So whereas an article, for example, might say African Americans experienced a difficult time racially in segregated schools, listening to the oral history of a particular person, you will be able to hear and understand in more depth how that particular phenomenon was experienced by an actual person. And so when you go into an oral history, a couple of things you want to attend to is you want to not interrupt, or interrupt as little as possible. We're in the Zoom space, so interruptions may not happen, but why you don't interrupt is because you break the train of thought of the person who is sharing their story. And by breaking their thought, you may disrupt critical information that you should have gotten. So it's almost like, imagine have you ever been driving in a car and you're behind someone that keeps hitting the brake, like way before they get to the stoplight, they're just pumping, right? Well, interrupting oral histories is kind of like that. You're not letting the story fluidly flow, okay? Another thing, though, is you're going to have questions. You're going to want to ask. So get a pen and paper or whatever feels comfortable for you and just take down some jottings. So that way, and what I mean by jottings is just quick notes. And so that way, when it's time to ask questions or when there's a natural gap in the oral history, you can ask your question. So an example of that might be the person who is delivering the oral history may say, oh, I went to Ann Arbor Jones School, and then they may go on to something else, but you're really curious about their experience at that school. Make a jotting to say, oh, I want to know about Jones School, so you can ask them about that later, okay? So that's really about also listening effectively. Listening effectively also is giving your attention, your full attention to what the particular person, the oral historian, is saying. And a way to do that is to really lend your interest. So figure out an anchoring interest of maybe why you want to learn more about this person. So rather than sitting there and just staring at them like, oh, okay, what are they going to say? Like if you know they're going to talk about schools, maybe you are interested in children's activities in schools. So you might try to listen for that, or you might imagine that they'll be talking about their childhood and you might imagine, oh, well, this person might have been born at this particular time. Oh, that was an interesting time. Now I'm really interested in hearing what they have to say about this topic. And then I think in terms of sharing your thinking and inquiries during the breakout rooms, I think it's important to, and we talk about this even in class, like to not attempt to refute the person's story or somehow dismiss their story. Or if you have other information about their story, be careful not to jump in and say, well, I was there and that didn't happen, or I never saw that, right? But more so ask clarifying questions if you're interested. Could you say more about how you experienced X? Wow, wow, I'm from that same community. I never saw that. Could you tell me more about where that happened? That's really intriguing, right? So be careful not to discredit the person or their experience, but rather turn on or put on your curiosity hat and recognize that the human experience is diverse. And even if, say, for instance, you were sitting right next to that person in school and you were classmates, you could have two very different experiences, and both are true because it's rooted in your experience. Okay. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. All right. So we had some guiding questions that we shared with our guests today that they will speak about when you get in the rooms. So we asked them to speak about how did the three contexts of either the schools, the neighborhoods, or their churches or community centers contribute to a Black village in Ann Arbor across time and space. We asked how do or did members of the Black community experience changes in the community of Ann Arbor over time? And then, and what was lost and what was gained, just to expand on that, on whichever topic they're speaking to. And then, just 1 second. How have members of the Black community engaged in activism and pushed for change in Ann Arbor?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So each person, each of our guests is going to center their answers on a different topic. So we have Pat Manley, who will talk about schools, and the facilitator in that room will be Lynn Chamberlain. We have Marlis Dean, who will talk about the neighborhoods in Ann Arbor and her experience there, and that facilitator will be Nia Nickerson. And we have Dr. Sandra Harris talking about churches and the community centers. And the facilitator in that room will be Laura Mayers. And they will introduce themselves a little bit more when you get into the room. So just to remind everybody about the plan, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes for each guest to share their story. And we'll have about 5 or 10 minutes for question and answer, discussion, whatever it turns out to be. So please go ahead and write your questions in the chat box. As Kimberly said, we're going to listen a lot to the stories, but please, questions and conversation is welcome. And our facilitator will help be able to make sure that it's a productive, interesting conversation. So I think with that, I believe we're going to go into our rooms.
I am just double checking one thing on my breakout rooms, and we should be ready in just a second.
I think there's a question about participating in each room, and at this time, so just to share the rest of the conversation, you will be assigned to one room, and the plan was to go to one room, but then we will come back as a group and be able to talk about everyone's experiences and what they heard. If you're in a room and you want to leave the room, I think that we could reassign you to a different room. They're all fascinating women, and I think we decided that we just have to randomly assign people to the rooms because they're all so interesting and we all want to hear what they have to say. But it'll be an intimate, productive conversation if we do it in smaller groups.
All right, with that, I am going to send us all out.
So that is why we were in those areas. So since we were pretty split as far as where we live, we got together at church or at the community centers. I attended and still attend the Second Baptist Church of Ann Arbor. So that is where I got to meet and enjoy the company of the other Black young people my age across the city of Ann Arbor. Once I started kindergarten, as I said, I attended Jones Elementary. Jones was a predominantly African American school at that time because of the where we lived. And even though there may have been Caucasian and other people who lived in that area, they could choose to go to private school or other schools. You know, a lot of them did go to Catholic school or private school instead of going to the public. He taught us some things that we didn't get from our other teachers, like how to communicate, how to be proud, how to be who we are and accept who we are. And that made a big difference in our lives. Whereas before we just got the regular uh, um, writing, reading, and arithmetic. I mean, he added that personal part to it that helped us grow. And that is so important, and that's why you hear so much about today that African American students are asking for more African American teachers in their buildings and so forth, and to have that experience because you do get a different kind of education from them. So I would say that my elementary uh, schooling was pretty good. And like I said, I didn't experience much, if any, racism that I knew of. What I experienced was outside of school. I was close friends with a white girl that attended Jones, and we became quick friends. And we would go sometimes at lunch. I'd go to her house for lunch instead of going home, since her house was closer to Jones. And I got interested in the fact that she took dance classes and ballet. And I thought, oh, I would love to do that. I want to do that. And I sure found out fairly quickly, number one, we couldn't afford it. And number two, if we could afford it, they weren't going to let me in. So that was the kind of racism I got, but it wasn't from the school. It was within the community. When I went to Tappan, I began to realize that some of the teachers were racist in the way that they graded us, in the way they seated us in the classroom. I'm the kind of person that needs to be in the front because if I'm sitting in the back, I won't pay attention. I'm too busy looking at everybody else, whatever. And I would say that to the teacher. I would really like to sit in the front. They would not sit me in the front. I would raise my hand, I would not be called on. Or if I was called on, they'd say, oh, yeah, yeah, that's right, Pat. Okay, fine. And then they'd go on. Or they wouldn't acknowledge it at all until a Caucasian student said the exact same thing. So I began to experience this racism. Um, they had athletics and cheerleaders. And so I always wanted to be active and involved. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go out for cheerleading. I want to be a cheerleader. Well, there were two of us, two African American, well, maybe three of us that went out for cheerleading. I didn't make it. And I found out that the reason that the one who did, because they only chose one, was they were going by how you looked. Okay. I guess I looked like a little African chocolate girl. And I wasn't smooth, and I didn't have my hair in a certain way, and all that. Um, And so I didn't make it. And it was mainly because of my appearance, not to do with my expertise as a cheerleader, because actually I felt like I was better than the one they chose. But, but be that what it may, it came out to me that it had more to do with my appearance than it had to do, because they wanted to get an African American person on the squad, but they wanted you to look a certain way. And my short nappy hair and darker complexion didn't wasn't what they wanted. Okay, so that was disappointing, but I was determined that at Tappan I was going to do something to make a difference. And to that's when I started to feel like my, not my goal, but what what I wanted to do with my life was to make a difference. I wanted to open it up for others like me. So when I my last year there, because we were there through ninth grade. So at the end of eighth grade, no, we were there through eighth grade. No, ninth grade, because high school started at 10th grade back then. And so at the end of eighth grade, they had elections for student council. And of course, student council didn't have any African American people on it. And so I thought, okay, I know they're not going to select me as president or vice president. So I'm going to run for secretary. And I ran for secretary, and I got, I had a lot of friends, so I was able to get, the signatures and all that stuff that I needed. And then I remember them saying, well, you have to give a speech, and I don't think you're going to be able to do that. But let me tell you, I did a speech that I don't think they'll ever forget. And when I finished, the students stood up and they just gave me a standing ovation, because I was determined. I know that I'm the best person for this position, blah, blah, blah. And so I was elected as Secretary of Student Council at Tappan, and I was the first African American that was elected to that position. And so since then, of course, it all has changed. Um, then I'll go on to high school. When I went to Pioneer, once again, you Pioneer, you could not get away from the fact that there was systemic racism there. It was just obvious. I mean, it was obvious in the student clubs and organizations. It was obvious in the classrooms and who took what. Back then, we had real what we called um, what's the word? Um, Students were put in blocks. Okay, when you signed up for school in the fall, you had four options. You could be on general prep, you could be on vocational prep, you could be on college prep, you could be on university prep. Well, the university prep was mainly for students in the APAC classes, and that were, in that range. The college prep were those students who had a combination of APAC and higher level classes. The vocational was the ones who took back then we had auto, foods, secretarial, and other things like that.
I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this experience. I know I don't have much time, so I'll talk fast. First of all, I know you're here because you like to hear about the churches, and I will speak to that. However, you'll also hear about the neighborhoods and education, because back in the day, so to speak, they were all interconnected. So, you didn't have one without the other. I do want to give a shout out to all of you. If those of you who are in the field of education, yay for you. That is the most noble profession that one can go into. I have been an educator all of my life, so you're doing great things. And so I just had to congratulate you on that. I'll start with, I came to Ann Arbor back in the late 50s. And I know I'm going to be dating myself. You guys are going to say, ooh, how old is that old lady? But I came to Ann Arbor in the late 50s. I started in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. I am a product of the Ann Arbor Public Schools. I started at Mack Elementary School in 2nd grade. So I missed the time period where all the Black children were going to Jones School. I went to Mack School. And also, we joined a church when we came here. It was 1959. We joined Second Baptist Church. And at that time, there were 2 large, major Black churches in the Ann Arbor area. And that was Second Baptist Church of Ann Arbor and Bethel AME Church in Ann Arbor. And so most Black families attended one of those 2 churches. And back then, everybody went to church. I mean, nowadays, people, you choose to go or not to go. Back then, because that was so much a part of the community, that was just a given that you were in one of those churches. Also back then, I came to Ann Arbor at around the same time they built the Ann Arbor Community Center, which was a spinoff from the Dunbar Community Center, which is where a lot of the Black children went for different activities. I went to the Ann Arbor Community Center, and there were after school activities there, and they would help children with, if they needed tutoring or different, there were, playful activities. And because I was 7, 8 years old. So, it was a place for children to go. When I started at Mack School, I was the only Black student in my class. And there were not a lot of Black people in Ann Arbor back in 1959. And I came from West Virginia. So as a rule, when someone from the South, and I mean, I consider West Virginia south of Michigan, but I didn't call it the deep South, but when anyone came from the South, they were automatically put back a grade. Well, that didn't happen to me. I started in 2nd grade. I finished 1st grade in West Virginia. I started in 2nd grade. But at that time, they had the little reading groups called the Birds and the Bees, and you were tracked. You were put in those reading groups by your reading ability. And I'll never forget how I was in the lowest reading group when I first started, but by the end of the week, I had moved up to the highest reading group. I have to say that I got a firm foundation with my education in 1st grade in West Virginia. And that was back in 1958, I guess it was. And I went to a school where I was the only Black child in the whole school. And so there's a history behind that, but it did give me a solid, firm foundation to start in when I came up to Ann Arbor, to the Ann Arbor Public Schools. I have to say that the churches back then is where the churches are where children learned their leadership skills. I am, my background, just a little bit about me. I started off as a teacher, yay, always wanted to be in education. I went into administration. I retired as a public school superintendent. So I've been in education all of my life. And so, but I always share that I learned my leadership skills at church. That's where the leadership skills, the things that you learned at home were re-emphasized and reinforced at church. I bet you a lot of people don't know there's a proper way to make an introduction. Those are the types of things that we learned. There's saying yes, please, thank you, no, rather than and shaking your head. All those are the types of things that we were taught, that they knew, our ancestors knew that we would need those skills want to make it out in this world. Let's see. So in terms of changes that came in the community and in the schools, that happened around in the early 70s. And I have to say, first of all, I have been a trailblazer in many ways. And one of those early ways was back in 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated. The change that it brought in this community was the Black students. At that time, it was Ann Arbor High School. I was in 10th grade. I was one of them. We marched to the Board of Education, which was on Wells Street in Ann Arbor at that time. and demanded some changes in the schools. At that time, they had students grouped into different curricula. So you were either on vocational curriculum, general curriculum, or college curriculum. And as a rule, most Black students were put on general curriculum or vocational curriculum. And when they tried to put me on general curriculum, my mother went up to the school and said, "Oh no, my daughter is going to college. She will be on the college curriculum." So as we demanded these changes, at that time, there had not been many Black students involved in extracurricular activities. So that was one of the things that we wanted to become a part of. You did not find Black students in accelerated or AP courses. So that was another change. And so I feel really good in being one of those students who marched and, and requested, demanded that changes come about for Black students in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. Also, around that time, around in the early 70s, that is when many Black people were hired as teachers in the system and hired as principals. Up until that time, you did not find a lot of Black teachers or Black administrators in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And again, these are all things that were talked about and discussed in the churches. You know, we had our youth groups there. We had like the BYU, the BYPU, Baptist Young People's Union, or the BTU, the Baptist Training Union. So these are all things when there were things that needed to be addressed or issues in the community, then that's where we talked about them in the churches. During, I believe it was in, my memory fails me, but it was in the early days when Dr. Albert Wheeler was our first Black mayor. And again, you know, as a rule, the Black people would, you know, come together and we would support different issues and different initiatives. That is when we started getting more Black elected officials. You know, before that time, you never heard of a Black city council person or a Black person on the Board of Education. I mean, that just didn't happen. So I can say that there have been changes in the community, in the churches, in the schools, you know, since, you know, we started requesting that those changes and coming together as a Black community to make sure that that happened. Now, the one advantage back then was that most Black people lived in the same area. You know, we knew where the Black quote unquote neighborhoods are. And, you know, except for a couple places, you're not going to find that now. For example, I'm in the house now that I lived in as a child. You know how you go out and then you come full circle. And so I'm back home. You know, my parents are deceased. I'm in the home. And where this neighborhood used to be mostly Black or all Black, and now it's mostly white. You know, there are just, I think maybe 2 Black families that live on my street now. And that's well and good. I mean, we all get along fine. There's, you know, no problems or anything like that. But when you talk about the changes, and fortunately, a lot of Black people have been able to move out into more affluent neighborhoods, but they still come back and work towards the betterment for, you know, the Black community. So at this time, I think I've been talking a little bit. I will say that it was back in the 70s, I believe, that the Black Parent Support Group started with the Ann Arbor Public Schools, you know, so that parents and students would have an avenue in which to go to discuss concerns. So, but again, you know, the churches were also there as well. The pastors were very active in the communities. You know, you saw them at all the different events and different things that were going on. You know, they wrote you letters for whatever you might need, letters of recommendation and things like that. So that's, you know, how things were back then and how the changes have come about. I'm not sure if I've answered any questions that you might have. So if you can just, you know, please direct questions to me and I'll try to spend the next few minutes answering your questions. when we were asked to do this, and as some of the other presenters and I were talking, we're saying, hey, we could make a day out of this, you know. So to know that we only have like 10 or 15 minutes. So I tried to skate through, but again, you know, the churches, the schools, the neighborhoods, they were all connected, you know, back then.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. I know we only have a couple minutes left, and I haven't seen any questions come in the chat yet. I can only see a select number of you, so if you prefer to, oh, great, we have a question. So what are songs from your church that you come back again and again to find strength? And that was from Alma.
And, you know, back then, before the contemporary gospel music, you know, I am a student of the old traditional gospel music. And so the hymns, which are lost today, but, you know, Jesus, keep me near the cross. What a friend we have in Jesus. Things that will inspire me and motivate me. I draw upon those hymns today, you know, so yes. Okay, next.
Wonderful. So we have another one here, Dr. Harris, and I know you entered this in your bio. Someone wants to know, where were you superintendent, and what were you most proud about during your time as superintendent?
All right. I was the superintendent in the Lincoln Consolidated Schools at Ypsilanti for a couple years after being assistant superintendent there. And I was the superintendent in the Oak Park School District in Oak Park, Michigan. My proudest moments are, and what drove me to be a superintendent, was that I was able to level the playing field for the underdogs. You know, children, parents, they were not getting a fair shot. And so by being in a position of superintendent, then that allowed me to be in a position to work with policymakers to make sure that everything was fair and equal for all. That was one of the things I really worked towards.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Another question we have, and I think we're going to have about 5 more minutes to talk, so that's great. Another question was, you mentioned being a trailblazer in a lot of ways. What has your experience been like being the first Black or Black woman in so many of your roles?
All right. Well, I look at it, you know, I almost have to say, you know, I think of Kamala Harris, you know, it's like she's there so that other young girls can follow behind her. And that's what I thought about. I want to be able to open those doors so that others can come behind me. There shouldn't really be, you know, first Blacks now in 2021, but there are, you know. So, you know, I wanted to make sure, and I feel so good, you know, being the first African-American to receive an earned degree, not an honorary, but an earned degree from Eastern Michigan University. It makes me feel good when I see other Black women come through getting their doctorate degrees from that institution. You know, to be the first female superintendent, to be the first, you know, African-American dean at a Lutheran university. You know, just opening up doors so that others can see, because one of the things that I always say is that, yes, Black children need to see Black men and women in leadership positions, but you know what? White children need to see Black men and women in leadership positions as well. And so that is one of the things that that I like to do. I mean, I was the second girl, not the first Black girl, but the second Black girl to be on the homecoming court at Pioneer High School, you know, so that can open up the doors so other Black girls, yes, you can be on the homecoming court too, you know. I was, you know, like I said, the first Black in many of my courses. I was the only Black student in a lot of my courses. You know, of course, first of all, there weren't that many Black students in, you know, the schools at that time. I believe when I was at Ann Arbor High as a 10th grader back in 1968, there were 3,300 students in that building. And I think there might've been a couple hundred Black, you know, and my experiences in the school as a high school student were varied, because my 10th grade year, I was in that building we would go down the hallway sideways because there were so many students in the building. Excuse me. And then my next year, we divided, the school was divided between Pioneer and Huron. and the Huron building was not completed. So Pioneer students went to school from like 7 to 12 in the morning, and Huron schools went to students in that same building from 1 to 6. And so that was an experience. And then, of course, my senior year, we had the building to ourselves as Pioneer High School. So I had a different experience each year I was there. Other questions?
Wonderful. We haven't gotten any additional ones so far, but there's more chats coming in. Great. We have another question. Thank you for sharing your experiences. How did you draw on what you learned in your church, in your work as a teacher and as a superintendent? And at which Concordia did you serve as dean?
All right. First of all, I'll answer the second part first. Dean of the School of Education at Concordia University in Ann Arbor. All right. And I am still working there. I'm Dean Emerita there now, but I am still working there. They did some restructuring, due to financial concerns. And so they eliminated all of the campus dean positions from that university. And so now I'm Dean Emerita, but I also oversee the graduate program there at Concordia University in Ann Arbor. And then the first part of that question was, how did the churches, how did my church work draw my experience? I am a faith-based spiritual person, and I have found that I have needed that. I have had to draw on my faith through my years of working in education and in administration. I mean, I have to remember that I went into a white male-dominated field, and so I was not greeted warmly by everybody, and a lot of times I'm still not, so I had to draw up on my faith. It's what I learned in church, and I'm still an active member at my church. I've been a member of my church now, 55, 57 years, however long it's been, since 1959. I've been a member there that long, and I still have to draw up on my faith to help get me through these days.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. I know we only had a very short amount of time. We could hear you talk all day.
Yes. Well, thank you.
But
yes.
Thank you. I think we're going to go back to the main room now and
Okay.
kind of share out on our experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I actually thought that I was supposed to give a more of a history, because most people ask me to talk about the history, but I guess I'm supposed to talk about myself.
whatever you're comfortable with, if you want to.
Okay. All right. Well, they asked me for a little biography of on myself.
Mm-hmm.
So what I can read it, and then I can tell you a little bit more about what. It's only like a page and a half. They just wanted to know more about me when they asked me to do this. So I will just read the little biography that I wrote. It's very short. Okay. I was born at Bayer Hospital in Ypsilanti. This is a result of my parents coming from the South, living in Ann Arbor, yet seeking a Black doctor, and one was located in Ypsilanti. I grew up in Ann Arbor, attending Mack Elementary, Slauson Junior High, and Pioneer High schools. In high school, I became interested in historically Black colleges and universities and decided to attend one after graduation. And I graduated from Fisk University with a BA in Economics and Business Management, 1978. Following working at the University of Michigan, I went back to school full time, and I earned a master's degree in education with a specialization in distance learning. And I worked as an English teacher, teaching students in the Shanghai and Beijing areas of China online. Having grown up in Ann Arbor, I was exposed to the arts as a child through my mother, who was a great fan of music, theater, and art. She exposed my siblings and me to many types of art forms through trips to museums, music venues, and performances. While attending Mac School, I was involved in the arts as our teachers, particularly a select few, directed us in Broadway musicals, taught us acting and all aspects of stage performance. And my parents were involved in the community, and they taught us that the youth must be uplifted as they are our leaders of tomorrow. And I tutored at Mac School in the 9th grade, as we only went to school about 2/3 of the day due to overcrowding. And the Ann Arbor Public Schools created 2 shifts at our school, which was Slauson Junior High School. And I went to school the 2nd shift and needed something to do in the morning, so I would go over to the elementary school, which I only lived a block away, and I would tutor 2nd and 3rd grade kids. This created my love of all education, although I never formally taught in a school system, but I always enjoyed helping and mentoring young people. And I began working in the corporate world in oil companies in Texas and Libby Glass and the Libby Glass Company, and when I worked, New York State Psychiatric Institute in New York City. I moved back to Ann Arbor in 1989 after having a family, and I made the decision that I did not want to raise my kids in New York City. And I worked for 20 years at the University of Michigan in course evaluations until our department was eliminated due to all our work being digitized. And at the University of Michigan, I participated in the MLK Symposium Planning Committee and other activities that I was interested in. I was also involved in my children's school, serving on parent committees, creating the first yearbook for Roberto Clemente, and I was an assistant Girl Scout leader at Bethel AME Church. And I later tutored middle school students at the Peace Neighborhood Center. Joining the board of the African American Culture and Historical Museum of Washtenaw County in 1994 was a great personal pleasure for me, and I've worked in various capacities there, including board chair. The history of Washtenaw County, particularly Black history, is I have worked with some departments at the university. I enjoy writing articles about Black history in Washtenaw County and written several articles for the museum's newsletter. In 2020, we collaborated with the Ann Arbor League of Women Voters on a display to celebrate 100 years of the women's right to vote. And I enjoyed conversations about history. I'm always anxious to learn. I like to, in my free time, sometimes I like to spend time in the Bentley Library. And I haven't been able to do that much because, of the pandemic and the library's been closed. So, I have prepared a lot of notes on history.
Sure,
what I will do though is let you ask me some questions. And if there's anything more you'd like to know on something, I may have a note on it.
Great.
Otherwise, I can just tell you off the top of my head. So,
wonderful.
Anybody have any questions?
Sure. Thank you so much for giving that. It seems like you have such a rich connection in history with Ann Arbor. And so I guess just to start off, so how did the context of neighborhoods, or how do you feel like neighborhoods have contributed to the Black experience in Ann Arbor? And in particular, having moved away, are there any significant changes that you note to, the richness of the Black experience, or significant differences for how it might have been, when you grew up versus how your kids are growing up now, just to start off the conversation?
Excellent question, because yes, it has changed quite a bit. The neighborhood really isn't a Black neighborhood. There's very few Black families left in the neighborhood. It has been gentrified, particularly starting in the 90s. Before that, in the 1980s, Black families really moved out. They started moving out in the late 70s. They moved out in the 80s, and there was a group called the Word of God. A lot of people that had joined this religious sect called the Word of God moved into the neighborhood. Then they moved out of the neighborhood, and it has been gentrified, and so you have more people probably in the upper middle class area that bought homes, and the value of property value has risen about 300%. And the taxes are real high in Ann Arbor. If anybody has a mortgage, they know. So, so this is what happened. As a village, we were all pretty close because families knew each other. For the most part, we knew one family or another. And, you know, sometimes an adult would always ask you who your parents were. And so we lived together. We went to school together. We went to church together. And we all knew each other. For example, now that we're older, we don't see each other much, but there are a lot of funerals, a lot of deaths in the last 5 years. And that's basically how we get together. We also have an annual picnic called the Old Neighborhood Picnic.
Oh,
And we have a picnic at one of the parks. And anybody that lived in the old neighborhood, black or white, can come, because the neighborhood was never 100% black. There was just an area that was concentrated for African Americans in the West Side. Carytown being the original black neighborhood since probably the 1850s. It might even go back as far as the 1840s. But anyway, it was a black neighborhood before the Emancipation Proclamation.
wow.
So Carytown was it, and the same thing has happened. Carytown's been gentrified. We did a lot of things together. We would, if there was a civil rights issue, we would have meetings, neighborhood meetings at the community center. Once in a while, we might have it at Mac School, but mostly the community center, because that was the center where African Americans felt was their place to meet.
Yeah.
Or maybe one of the churches. And so my children, I did have a conversation with them before on that, because of the things I would say. They would say, well, it wasn't like that for us. I said, because you didn't grow up in a black neighborhood like I did. Now people are just spread out around the city. Many have moved out of the city because of the cost of housing.
Yeah.
But I told them that we were pretty much a tight-knit community, and they didn't experience that. When I came back from New York in 1989, I realized that it was really changing, and I remembered my mother telling me, I'm tired of living on this street. Maybe I'll just move out. Maybe I'll just go somewhere else. And I said, well, where are you going to go? Well, I don't know. I said, well, I tell you what, you got a lot of these white people with money moving into this neighborhood. There's something going on that they're not telling you. They'll buy your property cheap and fix it up, and then it's going to be worth like 3 times as much. And my mother's now 88 years old. She's bedridden with dementia, but she still lives on the same street since 1956.
Wow. And Ann Arbor.
Yeah. So we've seen them come and go.
Okay.
Yeah. So now it's kind of hard. There's another family that owns, like there were several siblings, and they each have a house. 2 of them are up the street. One's around the corner. One's a couple blocks away. And we, sometimes we get there and we joke about how there's hardly anybody left, and how we get these crazy looks all the time. And sometimes you walk down the street and you get these looks by people like, what are you doing in the neighborhood? And we also had to have a meeting on that. I think it was 2019, Mac. We had a meeting after someone had accused this teenager of stealing their lawnmower, but come to find out their lawnmower was in the backyard. About just to educate the people about the neighborhood and kind of the history of the area, and to let them know they had no fear of the few black families that still live there. There were a lot of people that, they just didn't know about the family, and then they give the name changed the name of the neighborhood to Water Hill, or gave it a name because we just called it the West Side.
Mhm.
But they changed the name to Water Hill, and we thought it was pretty. I always said it was pretty elitist, but they liked the name Water Hill. But the old people, we never call it Water Hill. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, this was great. I want to open the floor up to
Okay.
questions that.
I can tell you, yeah, stick one of these notes up here. I have so many of them. One of the things I enjoyed about Max School is I felt we got a very good education. Like I said, we had, our teachers were really into the arts and they taught us a lot of music. And we had a lot of performances. And I would say, and I always say that it's probably, you'd probably be hard pressed to find any, when I was growing up anyway, any elementary school that had a better music program than they had at Mac. You know, my time at Mac School, I loved it. I went through there from K through 6. The playground has changed. There was an upper and lower playground, you know, they put a swimming pool in it, and they built a whole new building, and they weren't even using the old building at first. So then that's when they decided to add the middle school, open school grade levels. You know, the people, we always like to hang out at the different parks, mostly West Park, Mac School's playground. They say kids hung out on Jones School's playground, which is now community high school. You know, they bust the kids in 1965 out of Jones. That's when they closed Jones School because it was 75% black. And so they bust those kids out after 1965. It's probably another story in itself. There was also a time when they wanted to when you come out of down 14 and you go to North Main Street, anybody comes down 14 and goes to North Main Street, they wanted to build an overpass, which would have gone through the black neighborhood in Carytown. Well, you know, there was a big fight with the city over that. Reverend Carpenter, who was the pastor at Second Baptist Church, went and fought very hard for that, because what they were going to do was build an overpass into the city of Ann Arbor, move all the black families out, but there was no plan for the black families to go anywhere. And so somehow finally it failed. It failed. They got a lot of backlash from that. And that had to be about late 60s,
I have a
early
question.
70s.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh. Yeah, so anyone can ask questions if you want to pop them in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can also feel free to ask your question.
Sure, feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, so I have a question that was directed in the chat box that I'm going to go ahead and read to you.
Okay.
So, yes, the question is, my sense is that you had a very strong sense of belonging growing up. How has your sense of belonging shifted over the years, and what does belonging look like for your children within Ann Arbor?
Well, the conversation that I had with my kids when they were teenagers, when they were saying they don't feel like they lived in a black community, I told them that basically their black community was probably it probably came from their church, because we attend African American church. And so when they would do some activities with the Sunday school kids, that's more of their sense of belonging. Me, I'm very possessive of my neighborhood and my schools, and I feel that we all have well, things have changed in Ann Arbor, but Ann Arbor is still sort of considered a liberal town. It's gone very much from the feel of a college town. When I was growing up, it felt more like a college town. And when people would talk about Ann Arbor, they'd say, oh, it's a college town. Now people don't really say that anymore. And it's grown quite a bit as well.
Yeah. Great. So I have another question. What are
Okay.
the boundaries of the West Side community? If you can give a rough.
West Side community would be from Summit Street, let's say from Main to Summit, up Summit Street to Brooks, back down to Miller, and all the way down Miller to Springer at Asheville, I'd say Ashley. Which was sort of an extension west from Carytown as I guess the Black population grew. That part opened up a little bit more to African American families.
Right.
And so it was sort of extended from Carytown, which is another reason why I think it was a desirable area, because you can walk downtown, you walk to campus, which we did as kids. And I hung out on campus a lot because my mother was my mother taught school in, she hired a science teacher from Ypsilanti High School. But when she first started trying to get a teaching job around 1962, she was told that she had children and she should stay at home. And, but she eventually found a teaching job, and it was sort of by accident, because first year two, I guess probably starting when I was like first or second grade, she was substitute teaching. One day she was substitute teaching and a science teacher quit in Lincoln Consolidated Schools. And she went over there and got the job, and but she was a grad student in the summertime. So as a kid, I was dragged around University of Michigan's campus all the time. So, even when my daughter went to Michigan after high school, and of course I was working there as well, and I was recovering from a broken leg. And so when they had the parent orientation, they said, they're going to have the parents tour. And I said, oh, I don't need the parents tour. And they kind of looked at me, and I said, first of all, I grew up on this campus. And secondly, I work on this campus.
Yeah.
And so I don't need a tour. And plus my leg was hurting, and I was like, I'm not getting ready to walk all over the place. But,
well, Marlis, thank you so much. We have about a minute left in this breakout.
Okay.
Just really want to, I see the alert just came up. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your experiences. I think it's always being someone that's not from Ann Arbor and being someone that goes to school here. I think there's such a rich history that often goes unacknowledged. So this was such an amazing experience listening to your experience, and look forward.
Sure. I just feel like it's too short because there's a lot of history that I never touched on. And I do sometimes I give talks on the Black history of Washtenaw County. And from the 1830s, where African Americans were here, and there's actually one guy that I grew up with, his great-great-grandmother came here. I just want to say this. Great-great-grandmother came here in 1857.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to hand off to you now.
Welcome back, everyone. Wow. I was in Patricia Manley's session, and wow. And I'm sure everyone else probably had a similar experience in their session. At this time, I think what we're going to do is have whole group sharing and synthesis. And Davey, please tell me if I'm making a misstep in terms of directions here. So first, we'll take just a couple of moments to reflect on any new insights or new information that you learned via the oral histories. Are we supposed to do it out loud, Davy, or in the chat?
We were thinking, since it's such a large group, in the chat, if people would like to share an insight.
Okay, so I'll use my platform to share a public verbal
Great.
insight,
Maybe
and
while
that
you're
maybe
doing
can
that.
guide, that can guide others.
Wonderful.
So Patricia, I was really struck by your story, and in particular, Patricia talked about her experience growing up in education as a student in Ann Arbor, and also the community centers and churches that she was a part of. But what I was struck about many things, but one particular thing was the progression of the sensation of racism from elementary school through middle school through high school. At elementary, it was almost like a haunting. In elementary school, it wasn't really there, but we were so excited that we finally got one Black teacher and we felt something around that. And then by middle school, it was kind of there. I was trying out for things. I wasn't getting selected. I could tell the difference between this one teacher. And then by high school, it was like, okay, this is full blown. And so I was just curious about overall, like the absence of African American teachers and the absence of, or the labor, both the absence of opportunities for activities and things that will cultivate your social emotional world, as well as the labor that it took for you to get that for yourself. I was just wondering your thoughts on that, on that experience.
I'm not exactly sure what you're
I
asking
guess,
my thoughts on.
did you feel that, looking back on your experience as a child in school, this is a half-baked question, in Ann Arbor, would you say that, what would you say about your experience in school with
Okay.
being racially set aside or
Okay.
racially?
I would say that as far as the education itself and preparation for college, that I did get that. Ann Arbor is good in teaching you as long as you can figure out how to get it. So you have the material, you are able to be successful at the next level. As far as my self-esteem and personal feelings about things, my self-esteem was not what do you want to say? I didn't have the self-esteem that I would think I would have had had I had more African American teachers, had I had more people to take me aside, you know. So my self-esteem, my readiness as far as prep was fine, but my readiness as far as my self-esteem was not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If that answers your question.
That does answer my question. I have one brief follow-up. Do you think that education should be, from your experience, what is the value of that? Like, should education be addressing these kind of intangible self-esteem, social things that you said you have been missing or you missed out on in
Yes,
Ann
it
Arbor
should,
School?
and that's why you hear today. Well, today there's more options for the students. They have more African American teachers. They have the Black student unions. They are participating in more clubs and activities. So they have the opportunity to build their self-esteem in many different ways. It is better, but at the same time, those little nuances that you get in the classroom that could really knock you down are still there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to stop asking questions so that other folks can come in and ask their questions.
We just have maybe about 4 minutes, Kim, for questions and for thinking about how to move towards action.
Okay. I wanted to ask the first question to be equitable. Let's see. Maybe somebody could just ask a question because I can't see here like who asked the first question. If there were, oh, I see Nell has a question mark on the end of hers. So let's go with that one. How can we create a situation in which teachers working in Ann Arbor schools know some of this history?
And I wonder if any of our guests would like to
Is
speak.
that for you, Pat?
I think it's really to any of you.
Any of the panelists?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
Well, I would think.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Well,
Sandy.
Okay, no, I
Okay,
was just.
I would say that one of the ways would be if they are allowed to see, watch the, if they, not allowed, but if they would watch the recording from this session, and also read the artifacts of stuff that you've sent out. That is the way to know the history. That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with Pat. And then also, I mean, there's professional development in the schools. I mean, this could be a professional development session at the schools, or, you know, on opening day or whatever, you know, like they have sometimes, well, they used to have a big session on opening
Your
day,
cousin
but
Beverly's class.
there are ways that they can get this information, I have to say, if they want it.
Mm-hmm. I would also think that something similar to what we've done today, where we record, there are opportunities for maybe the museum to continue to record these stories and figure out a mechanism upon which they're shared with schools, where students can have these kinds of conversations. Because I'm thinking about my daughter, Miss Pat, and she's gone to every school that you went to except community, and how interesting it would be to put her in conversation with your and Miss Marlis and Miss Sandra's stories, right? Somebody suggested, I think it's a good idea for me to read some of just the comments that may, have people to ask questions. So let's see. Gina McGovern says, I was struck by Dr. Harris's experience of the church as a source of training, support, and belonging. She spoke of learning communication and leadership skills through church groups as well. It was a place where people came together to share their lived experiences in other areas of life. And that came up in my session as well.
I see a question from the basket asking also if the museum is still hosting tours.
Yes, we are. Most of the tours are done by Deborah Meadows. She's very good. She also has a videotape that just came out, but I don't know if it's completed. I have seen a draft of it. It's very good. We do have Underground Railroad tours. We have an Ypsilanti tour. We have an Ann Arbor tour, and they're both very good. And you really will. Everyone that attends them always enjoys them. Once this COVID-19 is over, we're going to try to go back and have in-person tours, but we're creating virtual tours right now. And you can leave a message on our Facebook page. You can probably contact, you can actually contact anyone. You go to our website, which is aachm.org, and you'll get more information, and you can stay updated through our website. One of the things I wanted to say is that we began to collaborate by giving talks at elementary schools. And we were hoping to do more, of course, starting in 2020 with the schools, but we have to wait until we all can get back together to restore ourselves to some sort of normalcy. We are all, like I say, if you go to our website, you may be able to watch the video. I don't know if it's available yet. And I think that sometimes teachers can learn with their students, because we were going to try to set it up where teacher can bring classes in.
Yeah.
They also have, I think, Community and Skyline High School would have groups that would go around sort of on a walking tour around downtown. And, one of the stops on Carytown, we gave them a lot of Black history on that. And they also walked around in Lower Town, if anybody knows where Lower Town is, on the other side of the Broadway Bridge from Carytown. And there's a lot of other things. So I would encourage you to look at our website and look at our Facebook page, and you can get a lot of information.
Right. There is one thing that I will say, and that is, I would welcome the opportunity, like if there's a class that you're taking, if someone would like for me to come in and in their class and talk about anything that we talked about today, as well as just leadership and education overall. Like I do that with some of the Concordia courses up in Wisconsin. Of course, I'm doing it virtually, but, talk about leadership skills and things of that nature. So I just want you to know that I would avail myself to do that if anybody is ever interested.
That's okay. Very great. I'm sorry. I was just making a note. Very, very great. I wanted to, before we have to end, I wanted to make sure that we get in a couple of talking points about what does our learning today mean for us, and how this learning may call us to action. So if anyone has any thoughts, I have thoughts, but I'm going to hold my thoughts. Does anyone have thoughts on what does this learning mean for us today? And what responsibility do we have to take action? And it could be the most minute action to the save the world action.
Kim, I wonder,
No action.
I wonder, since we're almost out of time, if I could lift up a comment from Zachary Karras in the chat, who basically says that, they thought it was interesting that the closing of Jones was meant to integrate the Ann Arbor schools, but it actually sounded like it caused a lot of harm to the Black community in the end. And it seems to me that there have been some really powerful comments here in the chat, and thinking thematically like that, noticing the themes that your stories sort of illustrate, and checking to see how those themes, whether they align with what's happening today still, gives us some sense of where we need to speak up more, because history continues to repeat itself. That's one thought I have. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can say to kind of bring things to a close. Kim, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think in terms of action and pursuit of justice for African American people, one thing that comes up for me from hearing and listening to these stories is the nuances of racism and marginalization on children in schools that we have not yet gotten good at addressing. Like, we can address, okay, we're going to provide you equal resources, your, academics, but the social emotional care, supports, and protections that African American children need in schools is still not being provided as it should be. And those voices are important, and those activities are important, and we need to think about how to lift those stories so that we can understand better how to tackle those issues.
Thank you, Kim. I wholeheartedly agree. And as people are voicing a lot of appreciation in the chat before they leave, I'm going to try to bring us to a close now and share that a lot of comments here are being made about people wanted to hear more. People wanted to hear more of the stories, to have more time to synthesize these important reflections. And this is so true and so real. And I want to remind everyone that the archive on the AADL library is just exceptional. And there are many oral histories of community members that you can hear there. We didn't link those in our module because we were going to hear from Sandra, Pat, and Marlis today, but there are many, many more, often hour and a half, 2-hour long oral histories there. Please go and listen more to this archive. And I believe that, this theme that's coming out here right at the end is where we really need to go. What are we learning from these stories and the archives that help us to see our community more clearly? I think we have an unfortunate sometimes reputation of being a very progressive town, and that reputation can render invisible, can obscure a lot of the harm that is happening and that has been happening for a very long time. And so we're very lucky to have these resources to turn to. So I want to thank our guests, Pat, Sandra, Marlis, and Kim, all of you for being here. Your wisdom, your generosity is just invaluable. I want to thank everyone here for being here with us today, and to really please sit with this last point we're in now, that Black Lives Matter is a call to action. When you looked at these archives, when you listened to the stories of our guests, what did it call you to do? How can you be an actor in making change in our community and making sure that your children, your neighbors, your families, your friends know the true history of our town and do something to make it more just for all Black people? So please work with us to dismantle the system that has been causing harm for many generations. And I want to end by reminding folks that we have our last day of the Black Lives Matter Week of Action tomorrow. Join us please on Friday for the Experiencing Black Joy and Womanhood session, drawing from the guiding principles of unapologetically Black and Black women. If you have any questions, our planning pod member will stick around here. Please go back, if you haven't, to the asynchronous module. A lot of questions people were asking were actually in there. There's wonderful resources on the tours at one of the last slides in there, and there are self-guided tours. If we have whet your appetite to learn more, and you're feeling like you didn't get to learn as much as you wanted today, then I want to say I think we have accomplished our goal. That there's so much more we need to know as a community so that we can do justice to addressing our history and making right by Black people in our community. If you have any needs today for care, please know that Kristen Carney's contact information is here, and we will stick around. Thank you so much to our guests, and thank you to all my colleagues for your support in coordinating this session.